Hi, and welcome to our webinar, Self-Care for the Caregiver. My name is Bill Gross, and I am joined by my colleague, Julie Ugoritz. Hey, Julie.
Hello.
Julie and I work for SAGE, which is the world's largest and oldest organization dedicated to improving the lives of LGBT older adults. So we serve lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender adults, primarily over the age of 60, and their caregivers. The topic of self-care for the caregiver is especially meaningful for me. In my personal life, I was a caregiver for an older adult for several years. And additionally, on a professional level, I have supervised volunteers for about the past 20 years, involved in programs that match these volunteers with clients of the agency for ongoing social support. So a lot of my job in that capacity had to do with supporting them around setting limits, around setting boundaries, and around making this into a sustainable experience and joyous time for all. And I think this is as good a time as any to just talk about the fact Julia and I are going to be discussing some of the challenges of caregiving, but I think we both want to start by saying that caregiving can be a deeply rewarding and a joyous experience as well. And our whole point of this presentation is to talk about ways that we can balance out to hopefully minimize those times when perhaps it starts to feel overly stressful um, for us so that we can create more joy with the people that we're looking after. Julie, take it away.
Thanks, Bill. I'm so excited to be here with you today. As you mentioned, I coordinate two of our social support programs, Sage Connect and Friendly Visiting. And I'm also really passionate about supporting the work of caregivers, particularly in the LGBT community. So I thought we would start by just kind of giving a broad framing of what self-care is. We say it's paying attention to your needs and then making the space to address those needs. And that can look a ton of different ways, and we'll get into some of those in the training. Two core elements of self-care are self-compassion, so being kind to yourself, and also presence, so tapping into your internal experience. And I also want to say that self-care, especially for Black people, other people of color, women, queer and trans people, and other people who hold marginalized identities, is about surviving in a system that wasn't built to serve them in the first place. So in this way, self-care can really be a form of protest and a way of saying that we're still here and we're going to meet our needs, even if the systems around us don't.
I think that last point is so powerful, Julie, talking about these communities that haven't experienced the kind of structural support, but need it as caregivers. I want to start by talking about why we're introducing this topic, why self-care for caregivers is even important. Um, and it's simply that when we are caring for someone, especially for someone we love, we do tend to neglect our own self-care. And of course, to some degree, this is natural because in these moments when we're caring for them, often their needs, their physical, their emotional needs, their social needs may be higher in those moments and more immediate than our own. And there's nothing wrong when sometimes those needs do take priority. I think the problem comes when over time, we continuously put the needs of the person we're caring above our own. There's a condition called caregiver stress syndrome, which addresses the physical, the emotional, the psychological impact of caregiving over a long period of time. There's been various studies done. And again, caregiving can be really a wonderful experience. And these studies are done more on the negative impact of caregiving if someone doesn't take care of themselves. There are studies done that up to 70% of caregivers suffer from some form of increased anxiety, increased depression because of their caregiving. We also see that this can take a physical toll as well for some folks, um, where there are increased risks for chronic conditions as well as decreased antibody response. So a caregiver might be more likely to develop that cold or that flu when they do come around. But these are not a given. And again, our purpose for this webinar is to talk about some of these trends and to help you find a balance, because what we found in supporting volunteers, family caregivers, is that in order to be a good caregiver, you have to start by taking care of yourself.
So true. Thanks, Bill. I want to talk a little bit about sort of the opposite of self-care. So burnout, which is a big, scary word, but also something that's really normal when we're doing something that's difficult. And there are sort of a few signs that I want to keep an eye on for myself and thought they might be useful as well. And sort of ways that I think my body is giving me like a red flag telling me to slow down. Um, some of those, as you mentioned, are physical. So like getting sick or feeling worn down or like you're never rested enough. And then there are also some of these signs of needing self-care that are like a little bit more easy to miss. And some of these are feeling like we can never do enough, feeling helpless or hopeless, and also feeling a sense of limited creativity, both in our caregiving relationships and in the rest of our lives. And we also might find ourselves feeling difficult feelings like guilt or fear or anger or cynicism. So as these come up, it's a sign that something needs to happen. And we live in a society where it's pretty easy to just numb out or to muscle through these feelings. But we really want to start with slowing down and focusing on your experiences and figuring out what it is that you need. So again, slowing down is a really good first step. Then the work of getting what we need is another more complicated question that Bill's going to take on now.
Yes. So often slowing down and getting what we need also includes some boundary setting, some limit setting. This is such an important component to self-care and can be really hard, especially with someone we love. I think that boundary setting is hard with people we love, even in normal circumstances, but when they have increased needs, it's especially difficult. Um, in our work, I think Julie and myself, part of our job is to coach caregivers in how to say no. And it can be in a very loving way, right? It can be just saying, I know you want help in going over these bills, for instance, but I realize I haven't eaten for the last 5 hours. And so I need to run and get some lunch. And then I'm actually going to take a walk around the block and breathe in some fresh air. And then I'm going to come back and we can look at this together. How does that sound? So it's a way of really carving out time for yourself and not being at the mercy so much of the person you're caring for. It's a way of establishing agency. It's a way of telling yourself that your needs matter too. And I guess the one thing I'd add, Julie talked about the feelings of burnout, and one of those feelings can be anger. Um, and it just strikes me, I want to try to normalize that feeling. It's really normal for caregivers sometimes, along with the love, along with the sense of connection, to sometimes feel annoyed by the work that they're doing as caregivers. And I think the best thing you can do in those moments is to be gentle with yourself, realizing that this is part of the deal, not going into some kind of shame spiral. Oh my gosh, how can I feel angry at this person when they have all these needs? I shouldn't be feeling this. Something is wrong with me. No, it's just part of the experience, but it often does mean that we need to set more boundaries for ourselves and some limitations as well.
Ugh, those boundaries can be so tricky. So I'm glad we're talking about them. I think we also think about self-care as like a one-time thing. So like a big beach vacation. And while those are wonderful, we find that self-care is most impactful when it becomes a practice of lots of little things. And a way to start that is by just going back to what do we need? And a self-care plan shouldn't feel based in those feelings of shame or obligation. You want it to be things that make you happy and that nourish you. So a good place to start is identifying those activities and also the things that you're already doing to take care of yourself. There are definitely a lot of them. And are there ways that you can turn up the volume or make those activities more intentional to give yourself more nourishment? So for example, if you feel really nourished by your morning cup of coffee, can you include a couple moments of sort of quiet time smelling the beans and observing how it feels to be drinking that coffee?
Absolutely. Smell those beans. Yeah. No, I think it's so smart because often sometimes when people think about, oh, self-care, I have to come up with something new. And I think what Julie said is right on, that really it's about coming up with what works already, because we all have some degree of self-care in our lives already. It's just making more of it and smelling those beans. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some types of self-care, just to kind of break it down a little bit. And the first thing we have on the list is practical. And this really includes, your to-do list, right? This might include doing your laundry. This might include doing some grocery shopping for yourself. But it also could include things like medical appointments. I know I keep going back to studies, but there are studies that show I think it's up to 70% of caregivers say that they should be seeing their medical provider more than they are. Of course, that's really important to be doing those things, making those appointments. The next category is physical. We know that physical activity can have a positive impact on our mind, on our mood, on our body, on our stress level. And that might mean a walk around the neighborhood. It might mean a trip to the gym. It might mean some yoga. But physical could also maybe not include activity. Maybe it includes getting a massage. Maybe it includes getting a manicure. Just anything that helps you bring you into your body is a really important and impactful way of taking care of yourself. It kind of brings you back into a grounded state, right? And I also want to talk about spiritual practice. This can really boost our feelings of positivity. It often can really involve a feeling of either connection with a community or connection with perhaps a higher power or a higher energy. This might involve a structured, formalized religion, but it also could involve something simple like journaling, or for some people, doing creative things. Writing a poem can be a spiritual activity. And it can involve things like meditation. And for any of you who aren't meditators out there, it can be as simple as just concentrating on your breath. No need to do anything with it. No need to lengthen your breath. No need to close your eyes. No need to put on some kind of new age music. It can really just be focusing on your inhale and focusing on your exhale, just for like 3 breaths. And that in itself is meditation and can be really helpful to kind of quiet the mind.
That helped me to take a deep breath just now, and it felt so good. It really did. You mentioned, Bill, the connection with community that spiritual practice can give us. And I think that really leads into another type of self-care, which is political self-care. So being connected to a fight for justice can give us a sense of hope and meaning. And that can be really important. So a part of your self-care that is politically involved could be joining a mutual aid group in your area. You could connect to an organization that means a lot to you, or even just spend time with people who think like you. So that could be going to a book club. And this can sometimes be a bigger time commitment than we're able to make space for, which is totally okay. And it's totally fine to start small. And again, go back to what nourishes you. We come to emotional self-care. I run a support group at Sage for LGBT caregivers, and I think that space can be really useful. So relying on other people to sort of help us carry the load. And that can look like a support group or a peer support group or even individual therapy as well. And then our final type of self-care is technological. We spend so much, or I spend so much time on my phone, and it can be really stressful. So finding ways to moderate my screen time and also trying not to follow people or accounts that upset me, I find really useful. So you can also use your phone as a tool. There are so many amazing apps that manage your habits or give you advice about how to meditate. And those are really useful tools that we think we should also be including into our self-care routine.
Absolutely. And it occurs to me, Julie, that self-care is really about both what we focus on and also what we take away. When you're talking about technology, that what are the things that are impeding my self-care? And that's really important as well. So want to talk about just some last tips that can hopefully help us in kind of bringing this home and what works here. And the first tip we have, again, is practice saying no. And we put this here because it is so hard and we need these reminders. It can be gentle, it can be loving, but practice ways of allowing your own time. Identify your own triggers. I think often for us, especially for those of us who who practice caregiving over a longer period of time, we can probably identify times during the day or specific activities which are especially stressful with the person we're caring for. And this is all about just focusing in on finding what those times are, getting a perspective of that, so you can kind of allow yourself to take care of yourself, especially gently during those moments. If making dinner for the person you're caring for often is a stressful situation, maybe you want to plan ahead and every now and then have a friend come over and join you to make dinner. Maybe that's a way of lessening the stress. And speaking of friends, cultivate support. And I think there are various levels of support here, right? There is the opportunity to talk to the next door neighbor about nothing, right? When you're talking about the weather or what you watched on Netflix last night. And that's really important. That kind of more superficial support is something that we need in our life, actually, as well as obviously deeper support, as well as having folks that we can talk to about everything that's going on. And maybe that's professional support as well, as Julia talked about, whether a therapist or a structured support group. Lastly, treat yourself. You deserve it as a caregiver. This might include that beach vacation that Julie mentioned, but it also might just mean that trip around the block of just taking in the springtime. What really is important in this is that you're consciously making this a self-care activity, right? You're consciously saying, I am now going around the block and I am going to enjoy smelling in that springtime kind of scent. It's about those conscious moments, and it allows you on an unconscious level, I think, for your nervous system to say, oh, okay, this isn't a time of high stress. Oh, okay, I'm not in danger right now. I can relax. I can enjoy the world around me.
Thank you, Bill. I love those four, and I think it's a great place to end. We would love for you to stay in contact with us. These are email addresses and also just a couple of resources on the screen that can be helpful for caregivers. And we also want to end by wishing you a really wonderful, fulfilling self care practice. And even if it's small, even if you're building it, we really hope that you have one that fulfills you. And we really support and uplift your work as caregivers. So thanks for your time today.